True damage. What is it, and is it really that important? In this video I want to talk about the different types of damage we have in Fire Emblem Heroes, and that includes discussing what exactly true damage is. Now, the definition of true damage has become a bit of a muddy topic, with misunderstandings and confusion being spread around anytime people start to talk about it. So hopefully this video can help set the record straight, and to do that I will be first talking about the other types of damage in the game, mainly base damage and then boosted damage. Both are important to understand before we start talking about true damage. I won't be going into extreme detail about the damage formula for the game, but there is going to be quite a bit of numbers so that we can prove certain things. Let's get started. So what is base damage? Base damage is basically the number in the battle preview that tells you how much damage your unit is dealing with a regular attack. This value is calculated simply by taking your unit's attack stat minus the foe's defense or res stat, depending on if your unit does physical or magical damage. It should be pointed out that you can have negative base damage, but the battle preview will not show it. In fact, any negative damage is just treated as if you are doing 0 damage. However, keep in mind that negative base damage does come into play when specials are involved. So throughout this video we will be doing some calculations, and I want to keep track of the damage formula. Since the Fire Emblem Heroes wiki does a good job at showcasing examples for damage calculations, I will be using their notation. I will be simplifying the damage formula for the relevant parts of this video, but if you want to know the full details, you can check out the wiki page on damage calculations, which I will link in the description. So for base damage, our formula starts out pretty simple. Attack is equal to our unit's attack stat, and mit or mitigation is equal to the foe's defense or res stat. As such, the formula looks like attack minus mitigation, and remember, if you do end up with a negative number, it will just be shown as 0. I do want to include the weapon triangle advantage in this formula because it will be relevant in a later example. ADV or advantage stands for the weapon triangle advantage in our formula, and if you have the advantage, then you will get a 0.2 multiplier or an extra 20% to your attack stat. Having the disadvantage is a negative 0.2 multiplier or minus 20% to your attack stat. We will not worry about extra weapon triangle affinity gained from skills like triangle adept, but normally that will also fit into this formula. Also take note that values use the floor function, which is in the brackets with only the bottom part. The floor value of a number is used to get the lowest integer closest to it. Basically, that means you round down. Let's do a quick damage calculation example. Erica has 50 attack and is attacking Ephraim, who has 30 defense. Since Erica is a sword user, she has the disadvantage against Ephraim, so her advantage multiplier is negative 0.2. 50 attack times negative 0.2 equals negative 10, so we subtract 10 from 50 to get 40 attack. Then we do 40 attack minus 30 defense to get 10 base damage. This is how the usual damage formula gets calculated. Next, let's talk about boosted damage. Boosted damage generally is damage applied by specials, and it's signified by the wording boost damage by in descriptions. It could also be called flat damage because you simply add it to your base damage. It's a flat increase. However, some people might refer to flat damage as true damage. To avoid confusion, boosted damage is the term used by the game. Boosted damage is calculated differently depending on what special you use, and each of them have their own conditions. What's important to remember is that boosted damage is affected by negative base damage. If you played Heroes for long enough, I'm sure you are very familiar with damage specials. They provide boosted damage to your base attacks, which helps in defeating tough enemies. The stat-based specials are probably the easiest to understand. You take a percentage of your unit's stats and you have your boosted damage. I won't explain every special, but just know that these specials do use the term boost damage by. Glimmer and Astra are the only ones to use boost damage dealt by, and this is referring to base damage. So what does boosted damage change in the damage formula? You simply add it in, and that is why it gets called flat damage. It's a flat increase to your damage. Depending on what special you use, the boosted damage value formula itself changes. However, once you calculate that, you just add that number back into the regular formula. Here is our old example, except this time let's calculate boosted damage. Imagine Erica now has Bonfire and it's fully charged. She also has 29 defense. For Bonfire, the formula is just unit's defense times 0.5 or 50% of your defense stat. When we add in numbers, that would be 29 defense times 0.5, which equals to 14.5. Boosted damage also uses the floor function, so we round down to get 14. With some simple addition and subtraction, we end up with 24 total damage, which we will call the adjusted damage because this is no longer our base damage value. Adjusted damage in this example would be our base damage plus our boosted damage. Our base damage was 10 and our boosted damage was 14, which added together gets us 24. Now I also want to showcase what I mean when I say boosted damage is affected by negative base damage. Using the same example, we increase Ephraim's defense from 30 to 50. This means that now if you were to just use the regular base damage formula, then you would end up with Erica doing negative 10 damage. This would just show up as 0 in game. However, since Bonfire is added now, it has to take into account that minus 10 base damage. Negative 10 plus 14 equals 4 total damage. This is very important to understand because this is where true damage comes in. True damage is signified in descriptions by the words deals damage or deals X amount of damage. As far as I'm aware, true damage is only available from weapons and passive skills. There is no special that does true damage. It's called true damage because it is not affected by negative base damage. If the enemy were to have 1000 defense or resistance and your unit deals 10 true damage somehow, even if your base damage were to be 0 or technically less than 0, you would still do 10 damage. For the true damage formula, we have to clear up something. True damage is added on after base damage and boosted damage gets calculated. We also have to remember that the game treats negative damage as always equal to 0. This is very important to keep in mind. Let's continue using our same example, but this time Erica is using a wo-dao, which deals plus 10 true damage when special is activated. Everything is the same except we add on that plus 10 damage at the very end. Without a wo-dao, Erica deals 4 damage, but with wo-dao, she will now deal 14 damage. This is an example of true damage when you have a positive base and boosted damage total. Basically, it just looks like we added plus 10 boosted damage, and to be honest, there really isn't a difference here. However, things change when you have to deal with negative base and negative boosted damage totals. What I mean is what happens when your base damage plus your special boosted damage still doesn't reach a positive value. In this example, we crank up Ephraim's defense even higher and now it's at 70. Input 70 instead of 50 into the same equation and we end up at a point where Erica's base damage plus her bonfire proc is still less than Ephraim's defense value. She is currently at negative 16 damage. However, we treat this negative 16 as still being the same as 0. This is where true damage comes into play. Now our equation comes down to 0 plus 10 true damage from the wo-dao, so Erica will still deal 10 damage total. So the takeaway from all of this is that true damage is only relevant if your unit's base damage is equal to or less than 0, or if your base damage plus your boosted damage is less than or equal to 0. If you aren't dealing negative or rather 0 damage, then true damage is just going to act like boosted damage. There really isn't much of a difference, since if you are dealing with positive values already, adding more positive numbers won't affect anything. To be honest, I feel like true damage gets a bit overhyped because if you are dealing no damage in the first place, then things aren't really looking good anyway. However, to be fair, there is a merit to having true damage. If you have a super tanky enemy, a unit with the triangle disadvantage may still be able to deal some damage at least and maybe finish them off. I'm now going to be looking at some examples of true damage, and I also want to talk about certain skills to determine if they are in fact dealing true damage. So here's just a list of weapons and skills that deal true damage. On the left are weapons that require special to activate, and I believe they all add plus 10 true damage. In the middle column are weapons that can deal true damage on their regular attacks as long as you meet certain conditions. We'll shortly talk about VASSAL'S Blade and GIGA Excalibur because their in-game descriptions may be incorrect. Last, on the right are skills that grant true damage. Of course we have Wrath and Legendary Ryoma's Bushido B skill. Both grant plus 10 true damage. Then there is Legendary Erica's Lunar Brace, which people had questions about. Let's now take what we've learned and apply it to some real scenarios. First up, there has been confusion about VASSAL'S Blade and GIGA Excalibur. Do they actually deal true damage? The confusion stems from the weapon's description, which states if unit speed is greater than foe's speed, boost damage dealt by 70% of the difference between stats, with a maximum of plus 7 damage. While complicated, basically if Carla or Nino are 10 speed faster than their enemy, they get the full plus 7 damage. So based on this wording, since it says boost damage, you would assume that these weapons do not grant true damage and it's just boosted damage. Let's put this to the test. First, we will treat VASSAL'S Blade as if it granted boosted damage. In this scenario, Carla has 54 attack and Lucas gets 48 total defense when attacked. Carla has the weapon triangle disadvantage and we treat boosted damage as just plus 7. Using the same equation, our answer would seem that Carla would deal 3 total damage. The base damage calculation would end up with Carla doing -4 damage, and the +7 boosted damage would bring that out of the negative. Let's see what happens. Well, Carla ended up doing 7 damage. Alright, so now let's treat Vassal's Blade as if it granted true damage. Again, we end up with Carla doing -4 base damage, but that gets treated as a 0. Since the +7 true damage gets added at the very end, we do see that Carla does the +7 damage like the game showed. So based on our testing, it would appear that Vassal's Blade, and by extension Nino's GIGA Excalibur, both do true damage. So either their English descriptions use the wrong wording, or the two weapons aren't working as they should. One thing I want to point out is that the weapons with built-in true damage seems to add the true damage to the battle preview, so it's slightly misleading. Normally it would appear that Carla is doing 7 base damage on her own, however as we calculated she is actually doing no damage. The 7 damage comes from Vassal's Blade itself, and I wish the game differentiated how these weapons display their damage. Just keep that in mind. The next question we can investigate is, can true damage be reduced? In fact, we can test with the exact same scenario with Carla and Lucas. This Lucas has Deflect Melee 1, so on Carla's second attack, her damage gets reduced by 30%. Taking the adjusted damage we got from the last example, we know Carla is doing 7 true damage to Lucas. We then just have to reduce 7 damage by 30% or 0.3. That comes out to 5 damage. Let's see what happens in game. Okay, so the first hit does 7 damage as expected, and the second hit does indeed get reduced down to 5 damage. This proves that true damage can actually still be reduced by damage mitigating effects, and I assume it applies to defensive special skills and other skills and weapons with damage reduction. Basically, true damage doesn't care about any defense or res stat, but it can still be reduced if you have the right skills. For our last investigation, we'll find out if Legendary Erica's Lunar Brace actually does true damage. This time we will have an equation to prove it does true damage, and we'll compare our answer to the in-game result. For this example, we will use everything, because for Lunar Brace to activate, Erica also has to proc her own special. In this case, she has Moonbow. I'm using the Erica from the hard difficulty of her Legendary Hero battle, and I am boosting my Lucas to a massive 51 total defense. This Erica only has 41 attack, and she has the weapon disadvantage. For the true damage variable, we use Lunar Brace, which is equal to the foe's defense stat times 0.5 or 50% of Lucas's defense. We'll take this one a bit slow to make sure we have all the right numbers. First is our full equation with both boosted damage and true damage included. Next, put in the numbers, and for boosted damage we have to calculate Moonbow's damage, which is the mitigation variable times 0.3. Mitigation is equal to 51, and Lunar Brace will also use Lucas's 51 defense. Simplify everything a few times, and importantly, we find out that Lunar Brace will deal 25 true damage. That is quite hefty. We will also find out that Moonbow will be doing 15 damage. Add together Erica's base damage and her boosted damage to get -3, so even with a 15 damage Moonbow proc, Erica's attack is too low to do any damage to Lucas. The game will show she does 0 damage, however, since Lunar Brace is doing 25 true damage, Erica should still do 25 damage when she activates her special. Let's see how the fight plays out.
No time for hesitation!
It in fact does turn out that Lunar Brace deals true damage as expected due to the wording of its description. If it didn't do true damage, then we would have had to take into account the -3 damage, and it would have brought the total down to 22 damage. Now you can imagine why they gave Lunar Brace a special cooldown increase, because it's extremely powerful. It's basically a full Luna special, and you cannot stop it unless you had a damage reduction. Now, hopefully Erica isn't doing 0 damage all the time, but it's still interesting to see just how much true damage she can dish out. Let's put it this way, if an enemy had 100 defense, Lunar Brace would deal 50 true damage. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too confusing because damage calculations can get pretty messy. Hopefully this can help anyone who is confused about true damage. Again, to be honest, I don't think it should be the most hyped up thing because you will only notice it if you are dealing no damage in the first place. It can come in clutch if your red unit has to fight a blue unit, for example, that has a lot of defense or res, but is low on HP. If you can get that true damage off, then you can maybe defeat them, whereas without it, you would deal 0 damage with no chance. Realistically, you should be trying to avoid these scenarios. I guess if intelligence systems wanted to be super trolly, you could have a unit with literally 0 attack, but with a weapon that did something like 10 true damage per hit. Put all those attack points into other stats and bam, you have a tanky unit who can still deal some damage. I mean, I don't really ever see this happening, but you never know, I guess. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.